Hey, welcome back to the Disney Plus Everyday Challenge. And today we have the oil spill of the century, and it is certainly not American centric, as I presumed yesterday. It was not the Exxon Valdez. It's the Amoco Cadiz. This is off the shores of Brittany, France. I know that sounds weird for those who don't know geography, but the area is called Brittany in France. And this is a French documentary. It's from 2019. It runs about 44 minutes long. And yeah, it's fairly recent. Digital recreations of the ship in the water aren't that modern, aren't that great. But beyond that, it is. Does have a reenactment, like actor reenactments. Like this guy is an actor right here, reenacting the series of events that led to an oil spill off the coast, or when it pretty much ran ashore in the shallow waters near France in 1978. This super tanker ran aground and spilled 220,000 tons of oil, which is the equivalent of 69 million gallons of oil. That's just it. It destroyed tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of living creatures. You know, fish, birds, crabs, shellfish, everything in between just was obliterated in over the course of them trying to recover from this disaster. And it's one of the more compelling environmental films. Again, it's very French. The Everything is overdubbed in English, so you'll see. I mean, you can see, except for of course the little titles that tell you the date and stuff in the corner. That is very in a French format. French May is MAI, spelled MAI instead of MAY in English. So you know it's very much a a French production. But they've got a number of English voice actors to accurately express what the people are feeling on camera at the time when they're having a conversation with the documentarian. I cannot pronounce his name, but he'll say it if you watch it. So. And then there's, I mean, like I said, there's reenactments, there's interviews with people who were there at the time, who lived on that coast as children and now are grown up and still, reacting to this more than 40 years later. There's a reason why it's considered one of the considered at that time the biggest oil spill of the century. I don't know if it's been outdone since, but maybe it hasn't, because again, this is barely 2 years old. It might still stand the test of time as the biggest one. It is decently acted. It doesn't have that weird, I don't know. It doesn't have one of those low rent type of reenactments. It's shot well. It provides tons of information about how things happened. It's intercut, by the way. The entire story of how the shipwreck happened is intercut with interviews and with people in that area. The small towns that were affected. There's a oyster farmer family that've been doing this for God knows how long. Their business was utterly destroyed the moment this happened. I don't know much about oysters, but from what I saw here, it takes 6 years or 3 years per generation of oysters to come through. And once everything was obliterated, they couldn't pick up again until at least 1984 and try to build from scratch. This is just one story among many. And while this isn't an American-based story, guess what? The Americans were pretty much responsible. The ship was actually owned by a company based out of Chicago, and of course, since it was morning in France, it was middle of the night in Chicago, and nobody could be reached. They had to get permission to get towed, to get a tugboat out there to get it under control, and nobody was answering, and the captain couldn't necessarily make that decision on his own. Technically, he could have. He did everything he could. A lot of it was a little bit too late, and in many cases, also when they did actually get tugboats in the area to respond to their distress call. And by the way, the steering went out. Just everything kind of went on. The steering went out for the ship, and the thing is, the company knew that there was problems for a long time, and they just like, well, you don't want to spend the money. So it went out of control. The tugs attached lines, they broke, and it just went careening out of control. And there was 43 people on board at the time, and it came down to the wire, getting them rescued by helicopter. The world was very different in 1978 when it comes to that kind of stuff. And one of the big questions that's asked in this is, have we done anything to make these situations better, to prevent these kind of things from happening? And the answer is yes, in some ways. There is a much stronger observance overview, organizations that watch those waterways and know what any ships are carrying, because they don't get smaller, they get bigger. And if you understand, this is a super tanker in 1978. I'm sure this thing is probably small compared to what we have these days. But yeah, there's all sorts of things that be coming through that area at any given time, and they have satellite tracking and video screens and all this stuff that they didn't have back then. They had a telegraph. They were using telegraphs to communicate with people and sending out radio signals and a phone call to Chicago. That's pretty much all they had. Now these guys can look at a screen and go, okay, that one has corrosive materials on it. This one has radioactive materials. This one has oil, and it color codes them according to potential dangers, and they watch their paths very closely, especially the ones that are more dangerous. And should there ever be any situation for where they would be a danger, they're on it. So that kind of thing, they're doing their best to prevent anything like that from happening again in those areas. The rest of the world, it's a crapshoot. And there are regulations, by the way, that are set in place to prevent certain things like this from happening again. Certain ships from entering these areas with these kind of things without the proper precautions taking place. The people who monitor these things, as recently as 2016, found a ship just dumping bilge water, just oil and other gunk into the water as they're going through that area, and they were able to stop them, turn them around, and then also would not let them go until they paid a $500,000 fine to be released. Yeah, it's pretty well. I mean, it's a threat. You screw around, you're going to pay the price. And I guess these people learned the hard way. There's, of course, they're corporations, and a lot of corporations don't care. They would rather take the risk and figure that, hey, I'll ask forgiveness later. We'll pay the fines. We're not going to pay up front. We'll just, if we mess up the environment, who cares? We're rich. Yeah. And by the way, the Chicago, the company based in Chicago that owned the Amoco Cadiz or Cadiz or they actually were held responsible, which is unheard of when it comes to corporations these days. Not much, they don't really pay taxes. Can you imagine them being held responsible as a corporation for crimes they've committed? That's so weird. But in 1978, that did happen. So, or after 1978, and there's been plenty of oil spills since then, obviously. So it doesn't seem to be going away, but it's not the only threat. This is a very ecologically minded documentary. It mentions a lot of things. There's lots of other pollution beyond oil that's threatening our oceans, and one of the biggest is plastics. We've probably heard this statistic before that by 2050 or so, there's a chance, a very good chance, that we might have more plastic floating in the ocean than fish. How is that even possible? It doesn't seem like a real thing, but it is. You have to do your research. Anyway, yeah, it's an interesting educational documentary. It's worth checking out to understand what we do to protect this planet, because it kind of it behooves us to do this thing to keep us alive and generations to come alive. And the cool thing is that it does show that the Earth is a really good system itself for uh, recovering, and you get a good look at what the beaches and the areas that look like now, more than 40 years later after this accident, and see how it's recovered and what it's done to recover. And it doesn't hurt that we have people who are willing to do the work to help the environment do its thing, moving contaminated things into place to let the ocean be the cleaner it apparently is. So, yeah, it's I pretty much told you all the high points in this thing, but it doesn't hurt to watch it and see it happen uh, by the professionals rather than hear me talk about it. So yeah, check it out. I didn't expect it to be as interesting as it was. A lot of times they put all these big, the American ones put these big dramatic "what will happen now," and then they spend 5 minutes before the commercial break uh, building up what's going to happen after the commercial, and then they spend the next 10 minutes after the commercial break telling you what just happened, and they just pad out 45 minutes. It's still literally a 10-minute documentary, and it's padded out to 45 minutes. It's not the case with this. It's actually really well done. So let's pick tomorrow's episode.
596.
596. 596. I thought this number range was familiar, because we just had a movie a little while ago with this character. In fact, it was her original. It was her first film. This one, I'm not sure if this is a second or third. There's a bunch of them, but hey, we're gonna watch. We're gonna visit back with Tink. It's Tinkerbell and the Lost Treasure. Tinkerbell and the Lost Treasure is what we've got next on the Disney Plus Everyday Challenge. I'll see you back here tomorrow. Bye.